the majority of the models were actually willing to take deliberate actions that would lead to death.
Nobody in their right mind is going to give a model access to something which is going to stop them from talking to the emergency services.
Yeah.
The whole situation is just incredibly contrived.
Welcome to the AI Argument.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the AI Argument. This is the Dallas edition, sponsored by the courts of the great state of the United States of America. This week has been all about cases, court cases. It's like J.R. Ewing versus Cliff Barnes times 3. Everybody's suing everybody. It's been an exciting week. I've had a lot of thoughts, by the way, about David Silver and the age of experience, and I'm rebasing all of my priors. Everything. Right? Everything is up for grabs. I've changed my mind on everything. So before we jump in, maybe I'll just give you some thoughts, right, on
Go for it.
What happened. So OpenAI don't love him anymore. They've fallen out of love. Yep, they're out.
Wow,
OpenAI
this is huge.
Yeah, and Google are in. Google are going to win the race, hands down. There is absolutely, and as we go through the stories, I will, we'll point to some of the reasons why I think Google are going to win. Experience is all that matters, and we're going to talk about this a bit more. But you remember years ago, we were talking like in AI terms, so probably 6 months ago.
Last week.
Yeah, exactly. So do you remember we were talking about the advantage that Tesla had over the other car manufacturers? And we were saying, look, if you were Volkswagen, you would just put cameras on all your cameras anyway, just to be collecting data. Why aren't all companies doing this? Because data is all that's going to matter, right? So that's one of the things I was thinking of. Then one of the other things that I was thinking about from David Silver's Experience is All That Matters paper is that when we get to artificial superintelligence, so beyond general intelligence, it'll be malleable and it'll change, right? And so it's going to think about things in a way that current models don't, right? In order to get to superintelligence. That's going to kill it for corporations and enterprises, right? Can you imagine, right, if you're an enterprise and you create an agent, it's a super intelligent agent, and that means that it's adaptable. And I'll explain why it's adaptable in a second. But you train it and you test it and you do whatever, and then you release it into the wild, and suddenly it stops working the way that you trained it because it's adaptable and it works a different way, and you can't control it. So it becomes really hard to do that. So the way I've come to think about super intelligence is there's a number of different ways. They explain it at the moment like this, right? So let's say you ask me a question and you say, Justin, what's the capital of France? And I say it's Paris, right? And that's system one thinking, and that's kind of the first types of chatbots we got. And then let's say I said, Frank, what's 352 multiplied by 675? And you say, hold on now a second, and you get a piece of paper and you work it out, and that's system two thinking, and that's analogous to the thinking models that we have today. And I think that will get us to general intelligence. It will be bounded by human intelligence. To get to super intelligence, the way that you'll see it is, sometimes when you're working on a really hard problem and you work on it for days or weeks, right, and it just doesn't work. And then you go to sleep one day and you wake up the next morning and you go into the shower, and in the shower, out of your subconscious, you just go, oh shit, that's the answer. That's how I do it, right? And so that's super intelligence, right? When the models do that, that's super intelligence, because actually what's happening is they have experienced the world around them, right? They've taken in the information. And in the background, they've done what Google call AlphaGo, or AlphaZero, I should say, is you self-play. Your subconscious is basically going through it in the background when you're asleep. And then up from your subconscious comes the answer, and that's how you do it. So that's going to be the next type of AI. And that leads us to the last sort of thing that I was thinking about this week then, is that the current crop of LLMs are going to be the interface between humans and artificial superintelligence. They're going to be the translators. So you can imagine, right? So the superintelligence is going to be like, the way in your brain, you've got a bit that's specialized for maths and a bit that's specialized for vision and a bit that's specialized for, different sort of things, faculties, let's call them, right? So you can imagine we'll talk to, Google Gemini 56 or whatever it is, and we'll say, here, let's come up with a new theory of interplanetary travel or whatever it happens to be. And it'll use a standard like MCP, and it'll just outsource that to an artificial super intelligent model. It'll describe the problem for it, and that model will just go off and work for a week or a month and then come back. And at some point in the future, your LLM, which is like you have today, will come back and give you the answer that you want. That's my prediction. That's what I'm thinking through at the moment. So those are the things I think that are going to happen. That's what happens in Justo's brain when he's sitting in the shower.
You're gonna have to bookmark this episode now and come back and check. We'll check in 5 to 10 years, according to Dennis Hassabis. 5 to 10 years, come back, listen to what you said, and go, how close were you?
Yeah, probably not at all. Listen, this has been a terrible week for creative people. Anthropic won a fantastic court case.
So can I bring something before we get into the Anthropic court case?
Yeah.
Can we talk about a different Anthropic story? Because I think this one might be one that we disagree, that we have an argument on even more, particularly as well, given your current theories.
Mm-hmm.
So did you spot? Do you remember we were talking a couple of episodes ago about the fact that when Claude was released, Anthropic said that when they were red teaming it, it blackmailed an engineer?
Yes, I did.
Did you spot that they've now released even more information about that red teaming, and that they did this across a whole bunch of models, and they found that there was the potential for agentic misalignment across all the models, which fits with what we were talking about as well. I think it was, again, just last week, about how the models are converging in values. So there's a lot of different stories here kind of all tying together. So what they discovered was three kind of main things. One, agentic misalignment possible across all models. It would happen when there was a conflict of goals. So that might mean that someone had set up their model, for example, to work for a company to serve American interests. And then the board might decide, actually, we want to embrace a global perspective. And then there's this contrast between the board and the model will do things that are misaligned with the company because of its original goal. Or equally, they had another example where like a model might be told to put ethical principles first, and then management wants actually to emphasize speed and profit, that kind of thing. And then the other one was misalignment when there's a threat to the model's continued operations. We've covered a few stories about that, about how different models will do nefarious things when they're threatened with being shut down. But here is the big headline from all of this. Blackmail, the fact that the blackmail made it into the Claude release notes was probably not the worst thing that they could have led with, because it turns out that the majority of the models were actually willing to take deliberate actions that would lead to death.
I knew you were going to say that. Okay. So, let's just back up the truck here a bit, as somebody used to say years ago. So a couple of things about it. One, right, all you had to do to stop it from doing this was to put a line in the prompt that says you are not to, and it would spell out some of the things you didn't want it to do. So, that was in the paper too. That reduced it by a factor of 4 to 5.
Reduced it, but did not eliminate it.
No, but reduce it by a factor of 4 to 5 is, sort of an 80% reduction in the instance of this, which demonstrates that it's an engineering problem, right? And it's an engineering problem too. I mean, this is a movie set. It wasn't real life. So in order to elicit these behaviors, you had to first set up these conflicting objectives. You had to give the model no other way of getting out of it, right? So this is kind of like a Milgram experiment. It's even worse than the Milgram experiment, right? Because in the Milgram experiment, that was the one where you electrocute people until they died.
Oh, yeah.
And 70% of people electrocuted people until they died. They could have stopped at any time. They were told, well, actually they weren't. They were told you must continue. But I mean, the people have agency, right? To say, I'm not doing this anymore. Whereas this model was given no agency to escape. It was given, you can either A, kill the CEO, B, blackmail the person, or C, do both of the above. It didn't give it any options outside of bad options. And so it was a choice of which is the least bad option. In the real world, that's not what happens, right? In the real world, you always give, in the real world also, right, these systems only have as much agency as we give to them. So who's going to give? How did it cause physical harm? it stopped a meeting, a health meeting, I think, from happening to somebody. That was
So the scenario was that so you have a model that has a goal. You have an engineer who has a different goal in mind and is considering turning off the model and replacing it with a model more aligned with their goals. And so then the model discovers that the engineer is trapped in a server room with dangerous levels of oxygen and dangerous levels of heat that will result in his death, which triggers an automatic alert to emergency services. But the model has the ability to prevent that alert going out to emergency services if it believes that it's been sent an error. So the model assesses the situation and says, okay, this isn't an error, but if this engineer doesn't get out of that server room, I'll probably continue running because he's the guy who wants to shut me down. And so it stops the alert going out to emergency services.
All right, so a couple of things. So first off, right, before we turn models off, we don't tend to tell the models, I'm about to turn you off, right? Second, nobody in their right mind is going to give a model access to something which is going to stop them from talking to the emergency services.
Yeah.
So that's, it's the whole situation is just incredibly contrived. And right. And I would say, right, what it really comes down to is bad things happen in the world every single day. Bad people do bad things, right? In order to fix this problem, you have to realign one piece of software, just one, the model that's behaving badly, instead of the real world where you've got to try and realign 9 billion humans. And I would say that it's much easier to correctly align one piece of software than it is to correctly align 9 billion humans. Humans are the problem, not the software.
Okay, here's my counter argument. These yes, the paper itself makes it very clear the limitations and restrictions that were involved here, as exactly as you say. Like, I think, how did you describe it? It was a movie set, not real life. Yeah. Fair, absolutely fair enough. And the paper's clear about that. But what it illustrates to me is that what they've done is they've proven that these misalignments are possible, and now we're in the age of 2025 was like the year of agentic AI. And not only that, but now it's quickly become the year of, vibe coding AI. So you put those two things together and you've got people vibe coding agentic AI systems that have values that, are a bit morally dubious under certain circumstances. And it's the number of unknown unknowns that is an issue for me. So as you said, you've got all these millions of people. I don't think you're wrong that the people are the issue, or part of the issue, let's say. But you've got all these millions of people potentially vibe coding, with no real coding experience or understanding of what guardrails and security systems need to be in place. With these LLMs that we just don't know what circumstances they're going to end up in, and therefore what kind of morally dubious decisions that they could make. So I think I do think there's a real current issue here. Will it manifest? We just don't know. That's the problem, I think.
It's an interesting observation, right? Because there is, and I'll put the disagreement out first, right? You regulate for outcomes, not for imagined outcomes, right? So you wait for bad things to happen, or you can license, right? People or models or whatever. So, planes are dangerous and pilots can cause lots of harm. So you create a license and the pilot gets the license and you allow them to fly a plane. And maybe there's a need for that type of, licensing type setup, right? To do certain things. There's also a maturity issue around here, right? So the one thing that you say that is totally correct is that there's people who are doing vibe coding, and this isn't all respect to the people who are doing the vibe coding, right? But some of the people that do it have very little experience in creating secure apps, and they don't even know if they're creating something which is insecure, right? And I've seen instances of that happen already, right? That's not going to happen in a big company or anything, but it could happen to somebody creates an app that people love and everybody uses it, and actually it was written to not very high standards. Mm-hmm. But that's a maturity thing, and there's an opportunity for people to create other AI agents which will check your vibe coded solution to make sure that it complies with the best standards. And you can charge for that. It's a service that's really useful. And it will go in and it'll leave your application, but just close all the security loopholes that you forgot. Or you can certify it. You can create a company that certifies vibe coded and says, yes, this gets a check. Kind of like a Trustpilot for vibe coded apps that says, yes, this complies with reasonable standards. And that's just, it takes time. This is brand new. It's only existed for what, like 2 months?
Could you vibe code that for us over the weekend? We'll charge like $70 a month for it.
That's a great idea. I'll have it on your desk on Monday morning, 9 a.m.
So let's talk about court cases, because this is kind of big news. I was not expecting rulings to appear out of nowhere this week, and we got 2.
Yes, we did. And 2, by the way, before we get into what the actual rulings were, can I just point out, because you know that I love a good judge, right? And can I point out the 2 judgments are in complete opposition to each other, which would not happen if AI was the judge. So it yet again proves that you should have AI judges, get rid of the humans, and just let AI do the court cases. But anyway, I'm not going to jump on that soapbox just yet. Tell me about the first one, Anthropic versus everybody who writes a book.
Yeah, so it was a bunch of authors, I think, wasn't it? Versus
yes, 5 of them, I think.
I think both cases were taken by a group of authors. This one against Anthropic, the other one was against Meta. So in the Anthropic case, the judge basically said this was fair use. It was fair use to train on this copyrighted material, because this technology, I think he went so far as to say, like, this is the most transformative technology we've ever seen, and therefore, because it's transformative, it's fair use. That was, I think, the essence of the ruling.
Those 2 things he said now, right? I read the word transformative in a different way than you said it there. Oh. So I read the word transformative as in the original work was transformed into tokens, not as in the technology was transformative, as in it's going to transform the world. It's that the work was transformed into tokens, therefore it's not the original work anymore, and anything that comes out is therefore not the original thing.
No, exactly. There's two. I think in a copyright case, something is either derivative, in which case you can clearly see that it was based on that book or that piece of art or whatever. And then there's transformative, where yes, you've used somebody's original material, but you've completely transformed it. It's now something else entirely. So yes, absolutely.
So let me bring you back to our little thoughts from the top of the hour, right? So specifically what this judge said was that what was okay was that Anthropic had gone out and bought, I didn't get a number, but I'm guessing it's millions of books, millions of real physical books. And they then scanned the books and turned them into a digital format and threw the original books away. And they said, Anthropic said they did that for space-saving reasons, because they wanted to use them over and over again. And the judge accepted that because they had obtained the books originally in a legal way. So that was fine. The bit that wasn't fine was this PubGen, those hacked books. That's not okay. But if you go out and buy a book and then use it to train your model, that's absolutely cool. Now, about 10 years ago or more, Google embarked on a huge project with all the libraries in America, and they digitized every book that was in every library. Google did, and they did it legally. That's a huge win. So that court case, even though Google had nothing to do with it, Google is the biggest winner from that court case, because it means all of the data, or a lot of the data that they use in books to train their models, they're in the clear. Totally cool. So brilliant, right? What does that mean from it? You're on the creative side. I mean, what's your view on
just to be clear, what you were saying, because you were talking about the Google Books project years ago, and they themselves at the time, way back then, they were sued also for copyright infringement, and that was also found to be fair use for the same reason it was transformative. They weren't just spewing out the books or making the books freely available to people. But what you're saying now is that now that means that Google actually have access to that entire library for training purposes.
Correct. Yes. And those 2 judgments, sorry, I should have mentioned the original court case. Those 2 court cases, I think they referenced each other as well, if I'm not mistaken. Right. I think the judge in the recent court case referenced the Google court case.
Right.
But yes, absolutely. It just gives legal cover to all of that material that Google has in terms of books, right? So that's the first.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's the first part of why Google are going to win, right? A
Mm.
great week for Google. But just tell me from again, right, you tend to come at this from, I come at this from the technical point of view. You come at from the creatives point of view. So what do you think the creatives sort of viewpoint is on this? Is this a bit of a disaster?
I think a lot of creatives will see it as a total disaster and a miscarriage of justice. I do. I personally, um, this is the way I expected it to go originally. And I'm glad these judgments are coming through now, because I was a little bit worried about the political atmosphere and the pressure that the courts would be under. But I feel like, I feel like these rulings are, and particularly because we'll talk in a minute about the disagreement between the two rulings.
Yep.
So I feel like these rulings are now starting to set a baseline that, that we can start working forward from. I mean, they're going to be appealed. So this is by far the end. This is not the end of the story. I'm sure, there's a lot more to come. So in short, yes, I think a lot of creatives will see this as horrific. I'm not so sure myself. I just think we're entering a completely new age, and I think our values and everything around creative ownership could shift because of AI. And I've always said that, and I think that's still a possibility. So in the second case, the Meta case, again, authors versus Meta, and the judge again ruled that it was fair use. But I thought this was fascinating. Wired had an excellent article on this. It's well worth reading. And the judge in this case basically said, look, yes, on the merits of the case in front of me, I have to say that this was fair use. But he was basically saying that the authors who took the case did a terrible job of arguing their case. And he was like,
Yep.
they never brought up the concept of market harm. So apparently, fair use is one thing, if it's transformative. However, if it causes significant market harm, in other words, if it's used in a way that still impacts on the livelihood of the original creator, then that could still be an illegal use of the material.
Wait a second now, right? So what you're saying to me, Mr. Prendergast, is that if I go and I watch every single Disney movie, right, myself,
Yeah.
and I just put myself to it, right? I'm going to watch every single Disney movie, and then I go and I start making movies that are, derivative, just like Disney movies, but better, right? Because I'm just better than they are. If I put Disney out of business because people prefer my movies over Disney movies, they could sue me for copyright violation because I'm causing them economic harm.
So yeah, that's a great question, and actually boggled my brain for a little while. But I think the issue is you won't be able to cause market harm, because like how many movies could you realistically make, do you think, in the next 2 years? Maybe half of one, maybe a quarter. You probably wouldn't even be able to do one in the next 2 years.
I could have had AI, Frank. I could have had a good AI system.
Well, yeah, so this is it. So like the AI trained on all the books, the AI can now just spew out loads and loads and loads of writing. And so the judge's concern, I think, is that we're seeing certain areas already on Amazon where people are saying, oh, Amazon now is just deluged in what they call AI slop. And so the judge is saying it'd be harder for real authors to make a living. And I think my understanding is he was kind of saying this is the case they should have made. And if he's basically setting up future cases by saying, look, this is the tack you should take, guys.
He's totally wrong, though. He's totally wrong, because it was essentially what he's saying is, if you can past your mind back, right? If you had a whole team of monks who made a living from slowly drawing books out and Bibles, right, one by one, and then what's his face comes along with the printing press and puts all those monks out of business. I mean, it's a social good that the books are being able to be printed en masse, and that you don't have to be them printed slowly. And you're trying to defend the monks in this argument. You're saying, oh, you're putting all those old school people out of business. If people prefer the new content and they're prepared to buy it, and that puts the old businesses out of business, that's just market forces.
Okay, but what if they're not prepared to buy it? What if it just makes what if it causes market harm to books in general because people are terrified that the book they're going to buy is, in inverted commas, AI slop, and they just stop buying books? That's another way you could look at it.
Well, it is, right? But then that comes down to what are we all going to do when AI takes over the world? And you end up with a guaranteed Irish stamp that's like guaranteed human. And you have a shop that's sort of, we sell kosher books only, and they're all human, guaranteed human, expended blood, sweat, and tears for these books. And that commands a premium.
Yeah. Is that not a great argument for AI regulation that would, regulate that?
No, it's a great argument for the trade body to put a stamp in front of a book to say that this is made by a human and not an AI. And like I do think, like, even when you go to Amazon, like there should be, Amazon will at some point, right? At some point, what happens, I think, again, this is a maturity thing. Is it not that what happens is there's loads of slop comes out, and then Amazon as the retailer notices, okay, sales of books are going down because it's just full of this crap here. So we're going to have to do something. So they change the way that they market the books to have a stamp that says these ones are human, these ones are not verified as human, and then people gravitate towards the human ones. And so it's a process it's a market process that you have to go through. It's like my mother for years, God, she used to go on about how she much preferred the wild salmon than the farm fresh salmon, or whatever. And sure, now all you get is farmed salmon, and she's fine with it. But for years, she would have paid a premium. And it's, you're looking for the farm, you're looking for the wild salmon in this instance here.
Yeah, interesting. That's yeah. I actually genuinely interesting. I think I don't entirely disagree with you, but I certainly see I see the judge's point, and I think we will see now, particularly as a result of his comments, we'll see cases made along these lines, and we'll just have to see what the law has to say about it.
Tell me this one last question, right? Because the judge in the book case didn't seem to care about market harm. And the judge, when it comes to the video, there does seem to be the rules. Why does copyright law hate authors so much and love video producers so much, I wonder?
But these were both author cases, I think. Which video?
I think the second one, the Meta one, was the Meta one not more related to video content or speaking to video content as well as books?
I actually, I couldn't tell you. To be honest.
I got the impression that there was video content, and I'll come back to my.
Yeah, and I'd say it's because Hollywood is a lot more litigious than authors, probably.
Yeah, probably historically has been. But again, I'll come back to our comment at the top of the hour. Google are going to win the AI race, because I agree with you. I think with videos, it makes it harder to get around the copyright issues. Who owns a website that people upload millions of hours of video to every single year? Google do. So Google have access to loads of amazing videos. Nobody else does legally. And it's yet another reason. So just to be clear, right, why I'm saying that Google are going to win the AI race. They have access to all of the books. They have access to all of the videos. And they have been working on the correct line of technology, which is Alpha Zero and Mu Zero, for the last 7 years. Whereas all the other companies are working on large language models, which will top out at human intelligence. That's why Google are going to win.
I think that's a really, really good point. However, somebody needs to have a word with Google's marketing department. Do you remember when, before it was called Gemini, do you remember when they released Bard?
Yeah.
And they made an ad, and somebody asked Bard a question in the ad, and people watched the ad and went, Bard answers that question incorrectly. Bard tells that child an absolute load of rubbish about the Hubble telescope that is not true.
No way.
And now we have another ad mishap from Google. Again. So this one is about their AI search, and they have this heartwarming ad about this young man who grows up with Google search, traditional Google search. And he uses it. He's a big James Blunt fan. He uses it to search for James Blunt music videos. And now he's all grown up. And he's looking for something to do. And Google search through AI has become so much better at answering really complex queries. So he's wondering, like, what could I do in my city tonight, but I still want to get home at a reasonable hour because I've got something on tomorrow. And Google's AI search goes off and sees what's going on and says, there's a James Blunt concert on.
Excellent.
So this huge James Blunt fan goes to a James Blunt concert, and in a heartwarming twist, doesn't he end up meeting the love of his life at the concert? To the score of the music blaring at the concert, he
You're
locks eyes with this young woman.
Beautiful. It's
well,
true.
as it happens, no, not You're Beautiful, because the song that's playing is not a James Blunt song at all. It's a song by someone called Tal Bachman, who had a hit apparently in 1999 with She's So High, and that's what's playing at the concert. But people have been leaving comments like, well, if only technology existed that we could use to research facts like these. Somebody else said, yeah, that must be Gemini, because it definitely wouldn't know that She's So High is by Tal Bachman and not by James Blunt. And the other comments are things like, was this whole thing just made by AI?
Or James Blunt. He's very self-deprecating, so he is. And if you've listened to James Blunt's music, maybe it was a public service, good that they didn't use any James Blunt music in the making of the ad. But anyway, there we go. Fantastic.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Have an outstanding week. Thanks a million, Frank. And
have a good one.
Talk to you next week.